COVID conspiracy. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And before I get into discussion today, I want to give a quick mention that if you like Bold and Blunt, you can download Bold and Blunt at edify.app. That is the online platform for faith-based podcasts. You can also get Bold and Blunt at washingtontimes.com or wherever podcasts are offered. So, coronavirus conspiracies. What's going on with the emergency declaration that, believe it or not, we are still living under in the United States of America? President Joe Biden, extended the emergency declaration due to COVID-19 and its various variants in March, when pretty much everybody in the world was moving on from the coronavirus. America's president took the rather astonishing step of extending the emergency declaration. Why? That's a really good question, considering that all the data that we now know, all the truthful research and data that we now know, show that people who test positive for the coronavirus and any of its variants have a recovery rate of somewhere in 99% chance. So in other words, people just aren't dying from the coronavirus. And you can say that it's due to the vaccines that came first from the Donald Trump administration and then from the Joe Biden administration. But really, when you start looking at the data of these so-called vaccines, you see that the efficacy rate, as well as the language and narratives used to sell these shots onto the American people, onto the world in fact, are really, first off, very low, and second off, very different from the normal language and narrative that's used for other vaccines. Look at this from the Mayo Clinic. Do COVID-19 vaccines protect against the variants? That was July 9th of this year by Mayo Clinic staff. Key takeaways from this study: the Omicron variant spreads more easily than the original virus that causes COVID-19 and the Delta variant. However, Omicron appears to cause less severe disease. People who are fully vaccinated, I am reading right from Mayo Clinic right now, people who are fully vaccinated can get breakthrough infections and spread the virus to others. So, in other words, to sidestep from this piece for a second, you can get the shot, you can get so-called vaccinated, and I'm putting vaccinated in air quotes here for a reason. You can get the shot, but you can still test positive, you can still get the infection, and you can still spread the virus to others. So, let's go back to the headline. Do COVID-19 vaccines protect against the variants? Mayo Clinic continues to write, but the COVID-19 vaccines are effective at preventing severe illness. Severe. Isn't that interesting? So it doesn't protect against you getting the virus. It doesn't protect against you spreading the virus to others. But it does protect against what is called severe illness. And how is that defined? Well, death, maybe that would be a form of severe illness. But other than that, that's a very watery term, isn't it? So Mayo Clinic in February of 2022 writes this under a headline, "Why Get Vaccinated?" Key takeaways from this finding. Mayo Clinic writes, a COVID-19 vaccine might protect you from getting COVID-19, might prevent you from becoming seriously ill, becoming hospitalized, or dying due to COVID-19, and might limit the spread of COVID-19. So, just to summarize here, getting the vaccine, in air quotes, might protect you from getting COVID. Then again, it might not. Might prevent you from becoming seriously ill from COVID, but then again, might not. And might limit the spread of COVID, but then again, might not. It's very interesting language. It's a very interesting narrative in how these vaccines, in air quotes, are being pitched, because if you look at the language and narrative from these same type of organizations, these same type of medical experts, for other vaccines, it's very different. Listen to this. Mayo Clinic once again. Measles vaccine. Can I get the measles if I've already been vaccinated? And this is what Mayo Clinic writes. It's possible, but very unlikely. The combination measles, mumps, rubella, MMR vaccine is a 2-dose vaccine series that effectively protects against all 3 viruses. Okay, here's the money quote. In fact, more than 93% of people who get the first dose of MMR develop immunity to measles. After the second dose, about 97% of people are protected. Isn't that interesting language? Where's the might? Where's the might protect with the implied might not protect? Where's the might prevent the spread of with the implied might not prevent the spread of? For MMR, for one of the traditional vaccines that you get as an American citizen, as a child growing up in this country, between the ages of 12 to 15 months, you normally start this. For the language of that, 93% of people who get the first dose of MMR develop immunity to measles. This is Mayo Clinic's own language, own narrative, own reporting. After the second dose, about 97% of people are protected. There's no might be protected. There's no possibly be protected. There's immunity, develop immunity. Very declarative statements. Compare that to why get vaccinated for the COVID-19 in February of 2022 by Mayo Clinic staff. A COVID vaccine might protect you from getting COVID, might protect you from becoming hospitalized or dying, might limit the spread of COVID-19. And there's a reason for that. And my guest today is going to detail much more on that point. But before I bring him on, let me just give you a quick answer to what's going on. From Public Health Institute, this press release, November 3rd, 2021. Breakthrough infection study compares decline in vaccine effectiveness and consequences for mortality. That's the headline. And let me just read you quickly from this paragraph. A new study in the leading journal Science reviewed COVID-19 breakthrough infections among 780,225 veterans, finding that vaccine protection declined from 87.9% to 48.1% during the 2021 Delta surge in the United States. The researchers from Public Health Institute, the Veterans Affairs Medical Center, and the University of Texas Health Science Center found a dramatic decline in effectiveness for the Janssen, that's Johnson & Johnson vaccine, from 86.4% in March to 13.1% in September. The reason for this narrative is that the government knows these vaccine effectiveness figures aren't exactly compelling arguments for Americans to take the shot, the next shot, the booster shot after that, and to continue taking all these shots that the government advises and recommends to infinity and beyond. So the narrative has to change. The narrative of vaccines has to go from one of immunity and protection with declarative, decisive figures, to narratives like might and potentially and perhaps, with the implied might not left out, conveniently left out. Otherwise, nobody would take shots. Why would you take vaccines, and that's vaccines in air quotes, if they were first stated to protect you with a, say, 87% rate or 95% rate, and then as the months go by and the data comes forward, you're really only getting protected to a 13.1% rate. It's not just ridiculous, it's deceptive. And you have to wonder, so what's going on? What's the end game here? If these shots, if these protective measures that the government is pushing to save us from COVID, to save us from a virus that isn't really killing us anyhow, why is the government continuing to push the narrative to get the shot, get the booster, get the other booster, take this pill, give the shot to your kids below age 12, give the shot to your kids below age 5, give the shot to your babies? Why does the government keep pushing this? And if you're not asking that question, you're missing the bigger picture. And my guest today, Peter McCullough, he is a internist, cardiologist, epidemiologist. He's the chief medical advisor of the Truth for Health Foundation. He has a long biography that includes expertise in the medical profession. And he's just written this book, The Courage to Face COVID-19. Of course, it's being downplayed by the mainstream media, but it's got some shocking, alarming, enlightening findings, and I'm happy to say Peter is here to discuss some of them and shed some light on exactly what is the government's interest here and the pharmaceuticals' interest here with pushing these vaccines and continuing to push this same fear-filled COVID narrative. Peter McCullough, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I look forward to reading your new book that you co-authored with John Leake, The Courage to Face COVID-19, Preventing Hospitalization and Death While Battling the Biopharmaceutical Complex. What is the biopharmaceutical complex?
The biopharmaceutical complex is analogous to years ago when President Eisenhower mentioned the dangers of the military-industrial complex. When these complexes form, they are very tight relationships between powerful entities. In this case, the big pharmaceutical companies and vaccine manufacturers, the public health agencies, worldwide agencies such as the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, Gavi, CEPI, the EcoHealth Alliance, critical laboratories in the world, in this case the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was built by the French. When these actually aggregate and congeal as a force with a singular goal, in this case mass vaccination of the world, we actually have a biopharmaceutical complex that's extraordinarily powerful in executing a business plan.
And how do the media play into this?
The media play an explicit role, and in this case it was explicit. It was announced on December 10th of 2020, about the time the vaccines were released. The BBC announced the Trusted News Initiative, and the Trusted News Initiative said that the media, both the major mainstream media and social media, will be organized and agreed to do this, that they would promote the vaccines, and they would do anything to crush what they call vaccine hesitancy. And in this case, it meant crushing any hopes on treatment for patients because that could lead to vaccine hesitancy, and then to crush any information on vaccine safety. If the vaccines had side effects, no one would ever know about it because it was intentionally censored on the media.
And you were among one of the targets, yes?
I was a target because ahead of the vaccines, I had worked with others to devise treatment protocols and treatment approaches for COVID-19 with the goal of preventing hospitalization and death. That was the public health goal. It never was stated by any president, by any public health official, but in fact, that was the goal. Americans wanted to stay out of the hospital, and they didn't want to die with the illness. People could get through it at home. That was reasonable. And so that's what we did with our early treatment protocols.
So when you say this joint effort or this partnership to vaccinate everybody, who do you see at the top of this? Who benefits the most here?
The Center for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, CEPI, was formed by the Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum. Those were the two big stakeholders. And they crafted a business plan in 2017. And it's about 60 pages long. And it says there will be pandemics, and we will be prepared for it. And our response will be to work with vaccine manufacturers to respond with worldwide mass vaccination. There's no mention of early treatment. There's no mention of any other intervention outside of mass vaccination. And the stakeholders involved have openly extolled the virtues of this in terms of revenue, that these opportunities are extraordinary. There are some CEPI documents that suggest, I think this is a $100 billion or more industry of worldwide mass vaccination, one illness after another.
One of the things I found interesting, because I've written critically about the government's overreach to the coronavirus for over 2 years at the Washington Times, and one of the things I found interesting was that the Bill Gates Foundation had this thing called the Decade of Vaccines, and if you look at the mission of that campaign, as well as some of the members, including Anthony Fauci, it seems there were some glaring conflicts of interest. What do you know about the Decade of Vaccines and the media's failure to report on this?
Well, Gates is a prominent public figure in our book, and the public utterances, I think, should be taken seriously when he stated that the decade of the vaccines, and he bragged about the return on investments of vaccines being 20 to 1 compared to anything he's otherwise done. Americans should take that very seriously. They really should. The conflicts of interest are in the open. Let me give you an example. Anderson Cooper takes 3 vaccines. Gates takes 4. They both get COVID. As prima facie evidence the vaccines don't work. They both get COVID. They recover. And Anderson asks Gates, should we take more shots? And Gates thinks about it for a second and says, yeah, we should continue to take shots. Well, someone who's profiting, and their foundation is profiting from each and every vaccine that's undertaken, and the biopharmaceutical complex that has been formed. People should look at these conflicts of interest in the wide open. Here's another one. Albert Bourla, CEO of Pfizer. Instead of explaining why there are 1,223 deaths after Pfizer vaccines in the Pfizer documents that were released under court order, instead of explaining that on the major media, he's actually advising the world to take the 3rd and 4th shots of Pfizer. Scott Gottlieb, former FDA chair on the board of Pfizer, he goes on CNBC as a regular contributor and advises people to take the vaccines, including Pfizer, of which he is financially benefiting. The conflicts of interest are in the wide open.
Yeah, they slap you in the face. You would actually have to do more to ignore the conflicts of interest than actually see them, which it baffles me that people have allowed this to happen in America, the seizures of individual liberties, when there are so many glaring conflicts of interest, and when the science, the so-called science, is just so deceptive, spun, and outright a lie.
It's true. One should actually also look at collusion. So here's an example. The French government under Jacques Chirac commissions a French company, BioMérieux, to help the Chinese build the biosecurity lab annex to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The head of BioMérieux is Stéphane Bancel. He helps the Chinese build the biosecurity lab where they're going to be starting to work with biological agents of potentially mass terrorism. And then once that job is accomplished, he joins a one-person company, Moderna, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Why would a CEO of a prominent conglomerate, a French CEO, join a one-person company in Massachusetts? And it turns out that Moderna begins to work under his leadership with the Chinese years before the SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19 pandemic occurs. It's all in the open. The connections are in the open. The Stephen Hahn, the FDA commissioner after Scott Gottlieb, who worked to block hydroxychloroquine. He worked to effectively lead a propaganda campaign against ivermectin. He joins the venture capital firm for Moderna. These conflicts are in the wide open. Rick Bright, who actively fought Peter Navarro and blocked the stockpiled hydroxychloroquine to Americans, he joins the Rockefeller Foundation, which openly supports vaccine research. So the conflicts of interest are in the wide open. Our book describes and lays out the timeline and the evidence in a readable narrative, a story, that there was active suppression of early treatment for COVID-19 from the very beginning, from generic drugs to emergency use authorized monoclonal antibodies to nasal washes and sprays. There was active suppression of early treatment in order to prepare the population to receive mass vaccination.
And people are definitely going to have to read your book, The Courage to Face COVID-19, and see the links and the research that you've assembled for themselves. Much of what you say, I have researched myself, and I wholeheartedly agree. So you're speaking to somebody who is a friendly source on this and finds your research very illuminating. But the big question, and this is something that kind of, I think, keeps some Americans up at night. They see the links that you yourself are drawing, or they see at least some of them, but they wonder why. What's the end game here? Because it has to be more than just money. Bill Gates is already a millionaire, billionaire. He already has enough money. What is his end game here?
That was the last question that I faced in the Texas Senate yesterday. I testified now for the second time under oath for the Department of Health and Human Services. This was about pandemic response, lesson learned. And after 8 hours of bureaucratic testimony, none of which was revealing at all, not a single bureaucrat could give the information on which Texans received early treatment, how did they fare, why did people get denied treatment and end up in the hospital. You know, there was bureaucrat after bureaucrat who could not answer very good questions from the senators. I received one last one and said, Dr. McCullough, we see the evidence here. We see everything laid out. Why? And I told him, I said, for the first time a few months ago, I attended a research meeting in Washington, an in-person research meeting, NIH officials, academic officials, many of the frequent contributors in the media, including myself, Dr. Marty Meckery from Johns Hopkins, Martin Kolda from Harvard, Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford. We are talking about the worldwide leaders in COVID-19. And for the first time in a meeting, I heard the word evil. It is the only thing to describe it. It seems that something happened in the world with the onset of this pandemic where it was in the minds of people to injure other people. And there are countless examples of it throughout the world.
I think evil is the only thing that actually describes what's taking place, because the left, the bureaucrats, the globalists, they're still using the coronavirus and health emergencies to continue to justify clampdowns and seizures of liberties, yes?
It's true. President Biden just extended the emergency. Remember in 1976, we actually had the Emergencies Act in the United States. And the reason why the act came into place is to actually terminate emergencies. We had all these, open-ended emergency declarations. And over the course, since 1976, we've had roughly 40 emergencies declared in the United States. The vast majority were for various forms of sanctions, actually. Some for natural disasters. but there's only been a few for infectious emergencies, including the H1N1 pandemic. But this one's obvious. America's back at work. People are flying in planes all over. We're in public places. An emergency should be obvious. There should be, fires burning or floods or hospitals that are overflowing. It should be obvious. Right now, it's obvious there is no emergency. There is a respiratory illness, COVID-19. It's well managed now. Mortality in Texas, many days we had 0 deaths. We're treating it easily. The virus has mutated. It's clearly endemic. Multiple experts yesterday under testimony said it's endemic. Endemic means it happens, just like pneumococcal or mycoplasma pneumonia. That means there is no emergency.
So what do you think about the talk? And I'm sure you've heard it either online or people have asked you directly. What about the whispers of Bill Gates and his population control agenda and things like that?
In 2010, he is on the front page of a UK newspaper. Again, the public utterances should be taken seriously with the proclamation of a desire for a reduction in the world's population through mass vaccination. But now the means by which that actually happens, the mechanism by which that happens, no one knows. But I think all of these public utterances, all of these statements that are in the open should be taken seriously. Another one that came up yesterday, under oath in testimony, was the book published by leader of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. 4 months after the pandemic starts, he publishes a book called The Global Reset, The Great Reset, and states in that book that this is an opportunity to reset a new world order.
It's all over the World Economic Forum's website, and yet the left tries to spin it as if it's a conspiracy theory when you bring up the Great Reset. That to me is what is so maddening, that it's so open and people still want to stay blind to truths. I know our time is up. If I may just finish with one more question. This is beyond the next election. This is beyond just America's borders. So what is your word of advice for Americans who see the truths of how the left is using the coronavirus and viruses and health emergencies to steal freedoms, and they want to fight effectively?
The key is the doctors. The key is the doctors. I can tell you, a recent Texas A&M survey stated that 10% of doctors don't think the vaccines are safe or effective, and the doctors are afraid to speak out. What patients need to do with their doctors, including the other 90%, is each one of them should schedule an appointment. And the patient should actually ask the doctor, should I take one of these vaccines or a booster? And when the doctor says yes, the patient should say, I've done my homework, I've done my research, and I don't think these vaccines are safe enough for me. That's it. Stop there and let the doctor hear those words. When the doctors hear over and over again, listen, a third of the United States, in a recent New York Times piece about a month ago, a third of the United States, 35%, is not taking a vaccine and they're not taking a booster. That is a big chunk of the population. If doctors hear that consistently, one by one by one by one, the message will sink in. And as doctors come out of what's called mass formation, which is a form of a psychological trance, as the doctors come out of mass formation, the doctors will turn this around. But the patients, the methods by doing this are the patients bringing the doctors out of this form of brainwashed trance that they're in.
I like that advice. I haven't heard that. That's very wise. Peter McCullough, co-author with John Leake of The Courage to Face COVID-19. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for putting the truth out there so boldly.
Thank you.
The book, again, is The Courage to Face COVID-19, Preventing Hospitalization and Death While Battling the Biopharmaceutical Complex. Honestly, in between tapings, I just bought my copy. I got it at Amazon, but you can get it wherever books are offered. You can also get my book on COVID. It's called Lockdown, The Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. Check it out. It maybe fills out the picture of what else the government has in store for the exploiting of Americans' fears over COVID. And I just want to quickly mention that if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app. That is the online platform for faith-based podcasts. You can get it at washingtontimes.com. Just find my name, click on it, and scroll to the bottom of one of my commentaries. You can sign up for my Bold and Blunt podcast there, along with my 3 times a week Washington Times newsletters that contain all my commentaries that I write for Washington Times all day long. And you can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are available. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.